Okay, and I'm not on mute, so I'm off to a good start. Thank you everyone for your time and coming today to the training. Like Cheryl said, it's 90 minutes, and I hope I don't take all of it, but there is a lot of good information in here. Coming up next week, it's going to be almost 6 months, or it will be 6 months since we went live with D365. Time flies when we're having fun. But thank you for your patience and kindness. As we've gone live, as we've stabilized environments, as we begin to improve processes throughout the application. If I haven't had a chance to interact with you personally in D365, you are lucky. But like Cheryl said, I'm now one of the city's dynamic business analysts. We are a 3-member team with Cheryl. And then previously I was with Rec and Parks for 4 years prior to the start of this year. Real quick side note, yesterday, this is my oldest daughter, and it's a humble, proud dad brag moment for a second. She won Most Improved Swimmer for the summer with her swim team. She started out looking like me when she got in the pool, and she ended up the end of summer looking like her mom. And if you're a parent, it's really cool when you get to see your daughter or your kid locked in and focused and having fun. So sorry for taking your time with that, but I had to humble brag real quick. Today, really the point of today is to cover accounts payable from product receipts through invoicing and all the processes that kind of combine and mesh between the two of those. The goal is to really come at it from a user perspective. As note, from Rec and Parks, I've paid in excess of 3,000 invoices over the last 4 years. I want to approach this from a user perspective so we can get the users to be more efficient. We can reduce some of the errors with invoice submission. And in doing that, that's going to save users time from having to correct any of the errors or incorrect information that's available. It's also going to save your approvers' times, whether that's at the division or department level, or if a document makes it all the way to the auditor's office. And then ultimately what we want to do is reduce time that it takes for us to remit payment to the vendors themselves. So just jumping into invoicing at a high level, the auditor's office, right, when they're going to review invoices, they're only going to look at a sampling of invoices. So it's impossible for them to look at in detail every single invoice that comes through for approval. They're generally checking for code compliance and accuracy, but ultimately it comes down to the user who is submitting the invoice, and then the division and department approvers to review for accuracy to make sure that everything on the invoice is correct. And payment will be correct when we get it to when we do remit payment to the vendor. We're going to jump around back and forth from this PowerPoint into a bunch of examples and different processes throughout, but we're going to start real quick. When we open an invoice, there is the header view and there is the line view, and there are some requirements that need to be filled in on the header. Obviously, and this is jumping a little bit ahead, but if you're referencing a GBR or a purchase order, you want to make sure that you're referencing the correct one. Within the header date is where your accounting date is going to lie. So invoices are not to be post-dated or pre-dated. We're just going to use the date that you're going to submit the invoice. Also, vendor name and remit address appear in the header view or the header tab as well. It's important that the vendor name that is going to show up on your invoice and remit address are in our system in their vendor profile. The name itself needs to be what the vendor is, or that DBA needs to be listed on their W-9. And then the remit address, we understand those change, right? So vendors can actually go in through the vendor portal and they can add and update remit addresses on their own. So this is what we prefer. So if you have a contact with a vendor and you can reach out to them and you can ask them to update prior to trying to have us update their remit addresses for them. That's preferred. However, we can still submit an invoice or an updated W-9 to W-9 at Columbus with that vendor's information, and we can get it updated that way. Last thing here, obviously, is we're going to put an accurate vendor invoice number that is provided by the vendor themselves. The two here, so invoice description and payment ID field. So invoice description, it says here, is vital to help the vendor apply payments. And the reason that is, I don't know if anyone has taken the time, or you probably have, looked at a warrant that gets sent. But for this particular vendor, Bonded Chemicals, they get a lot of invoices for chemicals. And this is what they're going to see when they get their warrant. And the information that they're going to get on the warrant is going to be the number and the description. So the description is really what's going to help them figure out, especially in a scenario like this where they're getting a lot of invoices, 20, 25 invoices paid on one warrant. It appears that these are all to the same account. I do know Rec and Parks does Bonded Chemicals, and they have 3 Cole Rec is their account number. So it's important that we fill in the invoice description, because it's going to help the vendor apply the payment properly to the invoice. The second one here is payment ID field. So this is to enter in directions if a warrant needs any kind of special handling. That could be, attaching a membership form with it, or it could be to be picked up by an agency or something that needs special handling. So it's worth mentioning, and I think Cheryl will touch on it a little bit at the end, but JP Morgan Chase is started to take over the printing of warrants for the city. So she may add a little bit at the end in regards to payment ID field. I did see a question just came in and says, what if a vendor does not have an invoice number on the invoice? I will defer to the city auditors there. I don't want to say something incorrect, so we'll save that one for the end, or till we have a break where they can answer and they can fully address that. So real quick, we'll go to an invoice. We'll look at headers. We're going to look at the header view, and we're going to look at the line view real quick. So this is something I definitely wanted to show, because we have gotten a number of help desk tickets from users who have said they have issues opening a second invoice when they're paying multiple invoices in a row off a purchase order. So you have probably gotten to this screen if you've paid multiple invoices in a row on a purchase order. It looks a little different than it did in DAX 2012, but there's a few ways that you can enter in your invoice number and you can get to your invoice. So if you click in where the invoice number data field is and you enter in the invoice number that you're going to use, there's really 3 ways that you can go ahead and get this opened up. If you click off the line, so if you're not on the line, see how when I hover over INV 100, I just have the normal mouse cursor. But if I go over this, I see the index finger, and it looks like I can click on that link. So you have to click off the line, and then you can click on your invoice number, and that should open it up for you. I'm going to see that screen a few times, so I'll show you the additional ways that we can open it, so I don't have to delete this and get out of it. I do also want to mention, if you see on my screen now, I am hovering over what says COC standard view. So about an hour ago, I pushed a few standard views out to all system users. If you had attended the personalization webinar, I made a big deal about you being able to add the remittance location for the remit address, so you don't have to go into the header view to change that. Well, I didn't realize that something had occurred and that remittance location was being blocked from being added by a number of users or for a number of user roles. So what we've done is now when you go in following this training, when you go in to open up a new vendor invoice, this will be the standard form that you're going to see. What we've done is we've added payment ID, so you don't have to go into the header and then payment tab to enter into the payment ID. And then we've added remittance location. If you hit the down arrow, you'll have an opportunity to choose any of the available remittance locations that are there currently. So that also is an improvement from not having to go to the header view as well. So just wanted to mention that. Looking in this now, in this vendor invoice header, we're still in the line view, but we're in a header tab. You should be able to get almost all the information without going into the header. There may be some instances where you're going to need to go into the header to enter in some additional information. I'm just going to put in some dates. This is a created invoice that I made. You know what, Cheryl? That's a good joke, I think, is there is no 631. It's 7-1, and I've made that mistake multiple times over the last few weeks. Okay. So here in invoice description, you may want to put account number. You may want to put if you're working on a specific project, if it's for a specific division, a department, anything that you can do that's going to help this vendor apply the payment correctly, that's what you want to put in here. So as far as header, that looks pretty good. I'm not going to put anything in payment ID because I don't want anything done special with it. Jumping into the invoice line requirements. So we'll get into the difference between 2- and 3-way matches here in a second, but the first point is do not manually add lines to an invoice that references a purchase order. So that's going to be true whether it's 2-way or 3-way. The lines are going to auto-populate from the purchase order that you're referencing with whatever remaining balance is available. So if you have not invoiced that purchase order, you're going to get the full balance available to you. If you have invoiced against that purchase order, you'll get that remaining balance of whatever is left. Invoice price must match the price on the invoice image that you've received, and that should also correspond with the purchase order itself. If they're not correct, the user at the division and department level needs to work with the vendor to understand the difference and then require and request a corrected invoice before submitting it for payment. Users, I've got noted there in bold and italics, so you cannot increase the unit price on an invoice above what is on the purchase order. However, you can reduce that, right? We'll always pay a vendor less if they're willing to let us pay them less, but we can't increase above and beyond what you have the purchase order set up for. Additionally, in D365 now, the net amount field is locked and it auto calculates based off of quantity and unit price. The last note here, POs are relieved by quantity, not by unit price, not by that net amount. It's relieved by the quantity. Now, the unit price ultimately calculates what the net amount is, and that is how it's reduced, but we reduce POs based on the quantity itself. We'll just pop down and we'll look at the lines really quick in this invoice. So we'll talk here shortly, if you just saw the slide, as to 2-way and 3-way matching for invoices. But on this particular invoice, this is a 3-way match. And what that means is that I really shouldn't impact, or I shouldn't be changing these quantities here at the line level. I'm going to use my product receipts and they're going to dictate what the quantity is. Changing the quantity here is going to cause an issue with your product receipt quantity match. And then it's going to leave a remaining balance on the receipt that you're attempting to use or match with the invoice itself. So there's really 3 types of invoices that we're going to use here in the city. The first way is a two-way match invoice. This involves services. And all we're doing here is we're going to match the price on the invoice to the price of the purchase order itself. A three-way match is generally or primarily with goods, but it can also be performed with services just as well. You're going to match the price of the invoice to the price of the purchase order, but the additional step is that we need to match the quantity that has been received on a product receipts to the invoice itself. So there's an extra step, and we're basically validating or confirming that we have physically received and accepted goods from a vendor. That's what the product receipt is going to help us do. The last is a direct invoice. That is a vendor invoice that is not associated with a purchase order. And generally, we're going to use this for petty cash and mileage, and there may be a few other instances where we'll do direct invoices. Really, so as I had stated before, a two-way match, a purchase order is going to be relieved by an invoice. A three-way match, a purchase order is relieved with an invoice and a product receipt. So even though we're invoicing today, I wanted to cover product receipts because the product receipts are going to drive your three-way match invoices. So if you're here and you receive, this is good information for you. If you're here as an invoicer, it's also good information to see. So you're going to understand the process that the receivers are going through and how it's going to impact your purchase order or your invoice when you begin to use it. But as I said, product receipt is really the process of recording that we have physically received those products. Product receipt is only concerned with the quantity received. It's not concerned with the price. So when someone goes to receive a product in D365, they do not have the ability to adjust the unit price. That's done at the invoice level. So the action to record the product receipt is that we're going to generate a product receipt, and that is directly linked to the purchase order. This is a note, and we're going to go through it right now. And I apologize, I'm not in, that's probably much easier for you guys to see. I apologize there. We're going to go back to an example here. We're going to receive a few product receipts or generate a few product receipts. When you go to generate a product receipt, you are going to get this prompt in D365, and it says current quantity value is product receipt quantity. The recommended value is ordered quantity. That maybe doesn't sound intuitive at first, but we are creating the product receipt. So we need to see the full ordered quantity to generate or make what product receipt we want and pick and choose the goods that have been received. We always want to select yes here. If you're not getting this prompt because you hit do not tell me again, send me an email or log a tech desk ticket. We can reset your user data so you get these prompts. So we're going to come back in here. I think this is good. So we're going to submit this to workflow just to get it out of the way. This one would get rejected because I did not attach my image. So you can open the purchase order, or you can just simply filter on the purchase order number that you're going to work on. And then you come up in the top ribbon and you select receive. There's generate and there's journals. Journals is where we want to look once we've generated product receipts and we want to review them, potentially correct or even potentially cancel a product receipt. We'll look in journals after we create product receipts. To generate one, we're going to come to generate and it's product receipt. It is not receipt lists. The only one we're concerned about is product receipt. So I clicked it, I see the prompt here. I want to say yes, okay? But I'm going to say no because this is also another common issue that has been raised by users. So let's say you happen to say no here. what you're going to get is there's nothing in your lines. And the reason is because that's based off of the product receipt quantity and not the ordered quantity. But you're totally fine. You just have to come up here to parameters, and under quantity, you're going to switch it back to ordered quantity. And then you're going to see your lines again. So there's two parts to your product receipt. The first is in the overview. You're going to enter in your product receipt number. And then you come down to your lines. So if you just hit OK here, I am going to receive everything that's left on these lines. And maybe I want to do that, but oftentimes I don't want to do that. I want to reduce the quantity, or I want to get rid of maybe 1, 2, or 3 of these lines because I've only received maybe line 90. So to do that in this hypothetical scenario, I'm going to receive line 90 and line 100. You do not go to line 110 and 120 and put zeros in the quantity. We just highlight them and we hit delete. We're not deleting them permanently. We're deleting them from this specific product receipt. If you go back in and you're generating another product receipt after this, you're going to see those lines again. You will always see the lines once you come back in. It's just deleting it from this specific product receipt, in this case, INV 500-1. I'm not going to reduce the quantity on these, but if I wanted to, I can reduce it to 3. I could reduce this to 1. And if I come back in, then I would have a remaining quantity of, 2 and 2. But we're gonna fully receive these lines just so they disappear. So that is how we're going to do our product receipt. I am calling this INV 5-500-1 just for my own naming reference. A product receipt should be generated and based off of a packing slip that came with the goods that were received. So it may not be the same number that your invoice number is, and generally, most of the times it's not. I'm just doing this because I'm making it up as I'm kind of working through these as examples. So this is good. I know my quantities match what's on my product on my receiving slip, or my shipping slip, and I'm going to hit OK. So I've already generated a few product receipts before this call, but now that I've generated that product receipt, it should show up in my journal. So I'm going to go and I'm going to hit product receipt journal. And product receipt journal, again, this is where we come to look once something has been generated. So we have generated a receipt. Maybe now we need to come in and validate what is on a product receipt, or we might need to come in here and correct or cancel. It is worth noting, and I should have said this at the very beginning, I alluded to it, but wasn't explicit. In the city, we have a separation of duties for receiving and invoicing. Users should not be receiving and invoicing the same transaction. So if you're a receiver, you do not have the ability to invoice. If you're an invoicer, you do not have the ability to receive. So that it's a separation of duties and roles, and it's really just kind of a fail-safe, so we don't have somebody receiving, processing, and invoicing everything. So it's checks and balances there. If you look down here, I've got on this line specifically, you'll see I have INV 300-1 twice. So you need to have a unique product receipt number for each product receipt that you use. If you ever see this, chances are one of these have been canceled or corrected. And that's exactly what happened here. This first one, INV 300-1, I cannot correct or I cannot cancel because I've already canceled it. However, I'm not deleting it, and you can't delete it. There will always be a record of that canceled or corrected product receipt. If you want to see what is actually on these product receipts, you highlight it, and instead of overview, you click on lines. So for this specific product receipt, 300-3, It was only for line 60, and we ordered 3 of them. We've received 3 of them. Okay, so this is a report that was, I don't believe, available in DAX 2012, or I was not aware of it when we were using 2012. This is called Invoice Receipts Report. And what this will allow you to do is that you can actually match at the PO line level the invoice number, the receipt that was used, and then the receipt quantity, and receipt and invoice quantity. So this can provide a lot of useful information. It's really easy to run. So you see it's modules, accounts payable, inquiries and reports. So everyone, I believe all users should be able to access this, this report, and then invoice receipts. And to open a new tab here. So it's in invoice receipts here. Just a quick cross training on personalization. If you find this useful and you want to make it a favorite, all you have to do is click your star here, and that will get you to your favorite. Additionally, or into your favorites. Additionally, it's an easy search. If you put invoice receipts into your search, it's going to key on this report specifically. So all you do is you enter in your purchase order number. I always, even though I've entered it in correct, I will still make sure I select it here just so I'm pulling that the system pulls it properly. And then you select OK. So it's a really easy report. There's no real parameters that we can run or change. And then it's just going to deliver basically the screen that you had seen previously there. Not an interactive thing, right? It's generating a report. There's nothing to input here for us, but this can be exported. PDF, Excel, Word, CSV, anything that you would need, above and beyond seeing it in D365.
And Kyle, what's really important with that report is that in 2012 we had a lot of questions trying to figure out what receipt was used against a particular invoice, and that was not information we could get to easily. So this report really kind of closes that gap, and it gives us that ability.
Yep. Okay, so stay out of this. We've done a product receipt here. So let's quickly we'll run over just an invoice. We'll do a 2-way invoice, and then we'll do a 3-way as well. And what I want to show, and I'm going to jump ahead here, so jump ahead a little bit in the presentation because I want to start this with 1-way on how we're going to attach our documents to an invoice and how we can view them much better than what we currently do today. So this is a 2-way service match for consulting services for D365. And I'm going to generate my invoice. Like most users, I've got my invoice pulled up on my second screen. You guys can't see that at the moment, but I'm running into this screen again. Okay, so I said we're going to run into this a few times, and there are multiple ways that you can get around it. So what we do is we enter in our invoice number. And even if I hit tab, I'm still on my same line. You can see I don't have the finger yet. I've got a finger there, index finger. I can't click this link. It doesn't matter how many times I hit it. I can't. So in order for me to, I can click on these other lines, or I'm in edit mode right now. I don't see edit up here. You can tell that I can input stuff. So I'm in edit mode. If I hit read mode, it's going to take it back out, and now I've got that finger again. So that's the other way to do it, is you can hit read mode, and you can come back into edit if you need to. But that's the second way that you can kind of free up the invoice that you've selected here. You can see that I've got a little warning sign here, and it's really important when you are creating multiple multiple invoices off of one purchase order. So I've got multiple pending invoices here. I have to change my default quantity here. If I don't change it here, it will lock it, and I won't be able to change it to ordered quantity in the next screen. This is for multiple pending vendor invoices. If you're just creating one invoice and there's no pending invoices on your PO, you can change it back and forth in the invoice. But if you have these multiple pending invoices in this screen, you have to change your default quantity here. So since this is a two-way, I want it to be ordered quantity. Now that I've done that, I don't have my little error message anymore. Now, just because I had that little triangle warning, it will still let me go in and create that invoice or open up that invoice. But then again, it will lock that. And I'll show you as soon as I click this, it's locked. It's grayed out, and I can't choose it now. I would have to delete this invoice, create another one, and deal with entering an invoice number and tabbing off and hitting a different line. So just important to keep that in mind. So I'm going to go to my attachments, and this is a departure. If we do this first, right? The very first thing that we do once we open this invoice is we're going to come in and we're going to put an attachment on it. So I've attached my attachment here. I can save it, but here where it says other information is default attachment, and it's toggled to no. I would recommend toggling this to yes, and it's, I think, a fairly big deal. Once you do that and you save it and you close out of your settings, what you're going to get now is the opportunity to have your invoice side by side with your invoice as you're entering in your information, or if you need to enter in the information. Now, if you don't like this, up here in the top, hide attachment. You can hide it if you want to. You can bring it back if you want to. If I go back to my attachments, and let's say I've got a contract maybe as well. So maybe this is I'm doing this for the have to put a specific contract in, or maybe this is a purchase order that I'm sorry, not a purchase order. Just if I need more than one document on here, that I can go ahead and I can just add these. Now that it's there, I don't have to make this my default, but I can come here now to these attachments. Oh, I do have to make it my default. I'm learning on the fly with you. That's what I thought. Cheryl, I think I have to refresh, don't I?
You do, yes.
There we go. Okay. So then you have the ability to switch between documents. Not related at all to what we're doing, but just wanted to show that we could we can put multiple attachments here, and then we can switch back and forth. So this is really cool, I think, for the invoicers, right? As you're entering this in. If you don't have two monitors, this is great. But it gets a little bit better in Invoice Journal, and that can help potentially with, this can help with approvers, this can help with users, and then this is also going to be available in Invoice Journal. So if you do not mark your attachments for default, and all of these invoices that have been paid by Cheryl were in DAX 2012, so we didn't have the opportunity to do that. All we see is what we see here in Invoice Journal. But if I come down to some of these that she has created most recently here in D365, and I select it, I get to view again. So this is really nice because you can see your image, after the fact. We don't have to go up to the attachments. We don't have to open or download a document anymore. We can see it better within. Now, same thing here. If we don't want to see them, we can hide the attachment or we can view the attachment. I'm going to hide the attachment for a second because I think this is a really cool thing that this is the second view that is now standard for all users. So COC standard view. This is the invoice journal. So this is the invoice journal for all invoices, but this view is also going to be in the PO level. So if you open up the invoice journal at the purchase order level, you're also going to have this standard view. What's changed about it is that now you're going to see warrant date. So warrant date is the date the warrant was printed. You're going to see warrant number. That's obviously the warrant number. And then you're going to see auditor approval. So auditor approval means that it's approved. It doesn't mean it's posted. It doesn't mean that it's paid. Okay, it just means that it has been approved. Once your warrant is printed, you're going to see the date and then the number. Now, seeing these three doesn't necessarily mean that it has been received and deposited by a vendor. This is not in the slides, and we can we can make this available, or I can put the path in an email or the follow-up email. And if you want to see if a vendor has paid, if the vendor has received payment and cashed the payment, we'll highlight whichever invoice we want, and we're going to hit transactions. Then we're going to hit paid by checks. And then we're going to do checks one more time. There's a cleared date that will show up here. So you can see that this was 2 days ago. They have not received it and they have not deposited the check. When they deposit the check, you will see the cleared date that is in here. We can't get the cleared date in the invoice journal. It would have been awesome if we could, and then we would have had all 4 of that right here. But again, this is a standard view for all users now. When you go back to work in D365, this is what you're going to see now. If you don't like this and you want your old view back, there's still standard view that you can go and you can select and you can pin as your default, or you can do any other views that you may have created, that you may have already personalized. You can go right back to those. You can pin them as your default. You don't have to use this as your standard view, but it is currently your standard view. So let's jump, now that we've done that, let's fill this out. Yes.
I just wanted to express with the ability here to view the invoice, the print view, if you will, of the invoice side by side. I would really encourage people to give this a try if you're not using it already. I pay a fraction of the invoices that you guys process every day, and it's changed my life. You can literally copy the invoice number right off the print that's showing and paste it into the invoice number field. Kyle's going to talk a little bit later about common errors that we see where maybe the invoice amount doesn't match the print copy. This is a great way to view that side by side and verify that total before you submit it. You can zoom in on this little screen here where the on-actual invoice is showing. You can zoom in. You can turn it if your invoice is sideways. There's a lot of options there. So, it's a little different maybe than your process you're doing today, but give it a try. You're going to love it.
So I think I'm good here. I've got the information that I need. Let's check, I'll check my remit address and make sure it's what it needs to be. I've attached it. I've got my invoice description. I've got my invoice date. So everything appears to me to be correct. And I think I'm okay to go ahead and send this to workflow. So we'll submit this to workflow and get it on its way. So I do want to jump back, and we didn't do an invoice for a 3-way match here. So let's go ahead and generate a few invoices here with a three-way match. And
Hey,
those three-way
Kyle, I
matches.
apologize. I have a real quick question for you that was just submitted. It says, so can the vendor invoice attachment be attached in both the line view and the header view? I thought that all attachments must be attached to the header view.
I apologize for that. That is a good question, and I did not go to the header view before I attached that. So I am creating a user error as I'm talking about them. That is a great question, and that is not something that I did do. So when you go to do your attachments, please put it in the header view. Attachments will still show up in the line view, but they have to, then approvers will have to go search for them and look for them and open up documents. So please attach at the header, and my apologies for not doing that. So moving with the three-way match here. So we are going to generate a few of these just to look at it. And there are some differences with the three-way, right? The biggest one being that that we have to match our product receipts, or that it's going to use product receipts here. I've already got a couple of these open again, but we're going to go and we're going to try to pay. Let's see, I think I've got invoice, maybe 300 we'll try to pay. And the third way that you can do this, right? So if you don't like moving up a line, or you don't like going into read mode, if you just put your number in and you close it out, and then you open up pending vendor invoices. That should do the trick for you as well. And you can get into it that way. Okay. Arg, that's not right. Okay. I apologize. I'm going to delete this because I want to look at one of the other ones that I've already got open. So I'll refresh. I'm going to open up IMV 100 because, and this is a good thing. So when I open this up, hide this one. So when I open this up, I have already received, as we saw earlier, I've got multiple product receipts out there. I've only paid one invoice. So I have multiple receipts that are going to come against this invoice. When you open up an invoice, if there are open product receipts, it's going to take all of them and it's going to apply them all to the PO. Every single product receipt is going to show up and it's going to come here. So again, let's say we only needed a line. Let's say we were paying, these first two lines. We don't want to delete these rows. We don't want to adjust quantity here. We want to use match product receipts to change these quantities based off the product receipt. So I'm trying to pay invoice 100. So what I'm doing is I'll go through here. This is at the line level. So you have to go through every single line of your purchase order to select or deselect the product receipts that you want applied to those lines. So for line 10, I'm trying to pay invoice 100. I've got two product receipts that are invoice 100. So I'm going to leave both of these checked. Same with line 20. Line 30 was only, so line 30 of mine, I only had the product receipt. Only one of my product receipts had line 30. Line 40 is the same. 50, 60, we're going through. There we go. So you can see here's INV 500. So that was not checked because this was already opened when I created this product receipt, but this product receipt would have been checked if we were just creating this new invoice. So actually what I'll do, and I apologize for jumping around, I'm going to delete this one as well. And I'm going to create a new one again so then we can see what they are when we go against it. And I apologize for jumping around. So let's generate a new invoice. We'll call this one INV 500, or maybe we'll call it 100 and create that one again. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but click to the other line, and then I can come back and open up this invoice. You'll see it's grayed out up here. It defaulted to product receipt quantity. That's what I wanted, so I didn't have to change it on the other screen. But just another note, remember, if you're paying multiple invoices, you have to change that default quantity on the other screen. So I come here, I see I've got multiple product receipts. I want to pay INV 100, so anything that was related to that. I'm going to come back to my match product receipts. I think this might show a little bit different now. So there we go. Now they're all showing up. So I want these two, INV 100 and 200. Same for line 20. Now when I get to line 30, I see there's 200, but it's not checked. There's 300 and 300. So you have to be really really careful as a receiver when you're coming through here to make sure that you're only marking what, or I'm sorry, as an invoicer, you really want to make sure you're marking just the product receipt that you want to match for your invoice. So there's INV 500. I could have missed that, so I'll click off that. So I feel pretty good that I've got them all cleaned up. What I am going to do is I'm going to deselect INV 100-2. And I'm doing that because I want you to see, hopefully. Oh, I must have missed one. If I had only selected INV-100-1s, that's what's going to show up here. And that's what we want to show up here. So that way you would know that you don't have anything extraneous there. I must still have an INV 100-2 on that. But I'm going to quickly enter in an invoice number or a description and a date. There is no 631. No matter how much I want it to be true. I would go to my header level, and then I will make my attachments there. Now, if I would have done that from the start, I would have had my invoice up here and have it side by side for my display. Like Cheryl said, I think this will be very useful for users, very useful for approvers. Highly recommend trying to make this part of your daily operating rhythm or your best practice. But this is done, I think done, so I'm going to send it on its way. And I want to open one more three-way match really quickly for you. I see Sherry said Kyle selected file. I thought we use image for invoices. I believe either one will work. Cheryl, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it's a little different than in 2012. A file is just a PDF. If you truly have an image, like if it, which would not be common maybe for an invoice, but like a GIF or JPEG file, you could choose image, but either of those will work.
Just so you know, if you saw that workflow contains no users, guys, I'm in a test environment, so it's not set up 100%. So some of those errors that you're seeing are due to the fact that we have not set this up 100% like production. So that's where that workflow error was coming from, if anyone saw that on the screen. So I'm gonna come in, I want to generate one more invoice, and I just want to see that I can show you on that match product receipts where it's going to come in as one, And then from here, I want to do a little bit of review on how to monitor your invoices once they're in workflow. And then I think that we'll wrap it up and have any questions or comments from the auditors or Cheryl here at the end. Okay, now see, this is going to pop back up because I have all, what's going on here? Go, didn't select the right one here. There we go. So I've got my multiple product receipts here. I'm going to come up and try to match my receipts again. I've got the INV 100-2s that were still out there. Forgot to get my INV 1 there, but all I'm going to do is select the one that's the 500, and I'm going to hit OK. Yes. And now my product receipt is INV-500-1. So now I know that this is going to match the product receipt that I've received or that my receiver has received for me. I'm matching that. So product receipt, quantity 3. My invoice here is quantity 3. The invoice image that I'm going to attach is quantity 3. Now, let's say because we ordered from High Touch and we ordered these and they were back ordered and they shipped. And when they shipped, they were now $7.75. Again, we can always adjust the price down, and you can see it recalculated the line net amount for us. We can't go above what it was. I've already forgot what it was. I think it was $8.62. I'm not going to change it back up. We can always pay less. But again, so here's the thing. We are relieving the purchase order against the quantity, right? So this was $8.62 or whatever it was. We're leaving about 90 cents per quantity, right, of 3. So there's 3 times roughly 90 cents. There's about $2.60-70 that it gets relieved, and it's just ultimately going to go back to the budget where it came from, or the fund where it came from. So, but we are relieving on this quantity. It's not like there's dollars amounts that are left on this purchase order that we can reuse. This has been relieved for the full amount. $7.75 is going to the vendor. That $2.60, that we reduced it goes back to your budget. Go through. I would come to my header level for an attachment. I'm not going to do an attachment since I don't have, this is just an example. Again, I would recommend doing your attachment first. It may not, it may, both 2-way and 3-way, you're going to get really good information. Even if you're not copying and pasting information on a 3-way match, it's good for verifications. I'm going to jump back up in here, and it looks like we've got a lot to go, but it will go quickly. So I have just talked through this with you. This is by default. Invoice lines are going to include and combine all not open non-invoice product receipts. That's what we just talked about. Again, this is saying it's at the line level. So these are every single line you have to go through and make sure you're matching product receipts as an invoicer. One note here. So one product receipt can be used for multiple invoices. As a best practice, we recommend that you create a product receipt as the goods are physically received, and that should be done, based on taking physical possession, the packing slip that you get. So to create a larger purchase order and then receive it all at once, we don't know if we've actually received it all at once. So it kind of goes against the nature or the point of having a product receipt. However, this can be done. You receive the full amount of the purchase order on one product receipt, and then you use that product receipt for multiple invoices to exhaust the product receipt. The major hang up and issue above and beyond it not going along with being a best practice is that if you go to cancel this receipt or you have any unused or excess balance on this purchase order, we have to go back through and find out on that line or on that product receipt what is remaining, and we have to get that canceled or reversed, corrected before we can cancel and finalize the purchase order. So we do not recommend this as a best practice. We would say create the product receipt as the product is being received, as the goods are being received. So we did I showed you the invoice views.
Kyle, real quick, just before we move on from the receipt invoice issue, probably as it relates to invoices, it is one of the number one items that we assist users with through tech desk tickets is receipts. Kyle kind of stressed it. I want to stress it again. The intent of a receipt is not to go in and receive everything before you've already got it, right? In some cases, you are receiving everything at once, so that's fine. But one of the number one things that we help with when it comes time to cancel POs is that receipts have been entered in full. But obviously, if we're canceling the PO, we've not received everything in full, right? So that causes some issues. So, I definitely encourage invoicers and receivers to talk to each other, right? And hopefully there's a mix of both groups in here today. But it is really important that those receipts are entered correctly. And when they're not, it does cause downstream issues. So, for invoicers, becoming familiar with looking at those receipt journals, and making sure they're entered correctly or getting them corrected as soon as possible if they have been entered wrong. Those are things that I can't stress enough. And then the other one that I would call attention to is we get a lot of users who receive errors that they've over or under delivered. You'll get that message in like your workflow. Your workflow will typically stop. You'll see a message that indicates over or under delivers. That is almost always a receipt issue where you're trying to invoice maybe more than is on the receipt. And so those are things to kind of be aware of and take a look at as you go forward.
Okay, so I'd shown the new or the way that you can get that side-by-side view, but let's just highlight what we need to have on those attachments real quick. So specifically for the invoice, obviously the most important thing of an invoice image is that it must be legible. If vendors are starting to get to the point where they're sending us invoices digitally or through email, that's perfectly fine. They still have to be legible and they still have to have all the information that we're going to cover here. Biggest one, vendor name or their DBA. That DBA has to be listed, on a W-9 that we have on file. That remit address must be correct. It must be listed on the invoice. And then invoice date, invoice number, obviously the quantity, and then the total dollar amount for what we're being charged. The auditor's office has requested or require rather that the remit address and the amount being paid are circled and or highlighted on the first page of the image for the invoice. If there is a credit memo that is being applied, that needs to be noted on the first page as well with that credit memo number, and then obviously the credit memo needs to be attached as well. As I did not correctly do, invoice attachment should always be attached at the header level. And again, that is because as approvers are looking into your invoices and your documents, that they need to see, it's easiest for them to see it at the header level. We don't want information being missed or not seen because it's applied at the line level. Important to note, statements are not accepted as invoices. So just because we get a statement that has 3 invoices listed and it says they're past due, we can't use that statement to remit payment based off of what we see on it. So that it's got to be an invoice and it's got to be the invoice image that clearly displays, what we're looking to pay for. Real quick with bulk invoicing. That has to be, you have to have permission from the auditor's office and that vendor has to be approved for bulk invoicing. I'm not going to touch on everything you have to do there, but again, on that first page where you're putting all of your summation for all the invoices being paid, the remit address and the total amount that you're going to pay for this bulk invoice needs to be on the first page. Lastly, when we're doing attachments, if you are the one scanning in the invoice, so it's been physically sent to you, please do it in black and white, and please do it not on the highest resolution. So on a resolution that is going to produce a nice legible image for you to see and for approvers to see. The reason is we pay for storage, so limit the file size of those images, because if it's not necessary, we don't want to be paying for additional storage. We have covered the view image side by side, so we'll hammer it home again. I think this is a great idea to try to make as a part of your standard operating procedure on a day-to-day basis. Again, it's also available in the Invoice journal as well. So the last thing, or as we're going to get into monitoring is the last thing that we're going to cover. But the most common reasons that invoices are rejected, and this came from the city auditor's office, is 60, by far and away the most. The greatest number of invoices are rejected because they have an incorrect remit address. Again, I will make the ask of you that if you have a contact with your vendor and you know the remit address is incorrect, ask them to jump on the vendor portal, self-help, and update or put a new remit in address for them. And that's great, because then it won't just help you, it can help any user in the city who might be working with that vendor. There is, as a fallback, w9@columbus.gov. The other one, the second most, and by far probably the second most invoices are rejected for, is that they don't have that attachment, or like me, you probably didn't put it at the header level. So that if we are changing our procedure and we're doing the attachment right off the bat, hopefully that's going to really have an impact on this 20% or the portion of rejections that we get for that missing invoice attachment. That kind of bleeds down into that dollar quantity and in the invoice date being incorrect or missing. So if you have that invoice side by side right next to you and you're just copying and pasting that information in, we should get the incorrect. We should eliminate the incorrect. We have to remember to get it in there so it's not missing. A smattering of payment ID fields are not filled out for hold requests or for special directions. And then the last one, highlighted in italics, of users potentially creating their own invoices. That's not something we should be doing for vendors, right? If they would like to have their payment remitted to them, we need to have them produce an invoice from them, from their own company. We should never be creating their invoices. This is one special error that I wanted to bring up, and this is not for users so much as it is for approvers. So if an invoice is submitted towards the end of the month and it does not get through workflow approval before we close the first month, or close that current month and open the next month that we're going to go into, the first person who goes in to approve that document is going to see this kind of succession of errors. So I've got one example here. I might not have it because I didn't click enough things. That's okay. Let's pull it back up here. So if I come in here, I'm an approver, and I go to approve this invoice. I've looked over it, I've seen the image, I understand that it looks good, and I'm ready to send it on to the auditor's office. And I hit approve. I'm going to get this error. Now, I wanted to bring this up for two reasons, and the first is, how do we get around this error? But if you ever get these where you have the blue-red ribbons here, and you look over to the right and you see a number and a down arrow, that means there's more information that we can learn. And maybe you may not know as a user what that information means, but it can be very, very helpful to us if we have the ability to see all of these error messages. If I look at this and I didn't know and I see this, there's really nothing that I can see that would tell me what might be wrong with the invoice. If I expand this, the third line says it still maybe isn't giving me the information I need, but the fourth line says a budget check cannot be performed. The fiscal period with the accounting date is not in an open fiscal calendar period. And that is the thing that will let me know, okay, we did just have a month end. And what we need to do to this document is update the posting date. So there's two ways that can be done. If you come into the invoice itself and you go to open the invoice, you're going to be prompted to update the posting date. No, because I've already opened it. You should receive a prompt. I've been into this one a couple times today and I've already opened it, and that is why posting date's not changing for me or giving me that prompt. You can simply update the posting date. Apologize. And I should, from here now, be able to approve the document. And it will let me approve. So you should get a prompt, and that prompt is, and I apologize, it's because I was working in there and I probably had already hit no on it. And once I hit no, it wasn't going to prompt me again. When you open that document for the first time, it's going to say posting date falls to a close or on hold fiscal period. Do you want to update it? And you hit yes. You don't actually have to update the period or the date then when you go into it. That's all you would have to do. You hit yes, and you can go ahead and approve it. Otherwise, you can open the document and then you make the change and you should be able to approve it. It only took me 5 months to remember that this error is related to the end of the month changeover. So, again, this is before you submit your invoice to workflow. Just again, based off of all of those common errors that we just talked about, is the invoice attached? Does the total match what's circled on the image that you've attached? Vendor and remit address, are those correct, and do they match what's on the image? The image, I mean, as you see, it's always back to the image. That is what's going to drive. It's the image and the purchase order. Those are what's going to drive what information should actually be on your invoice that you're creating. We always want to make sure that we have a budget check and that we have no matching errors. So if it's a three-way and we have we have a match error because we didn't have the product receipt correct, or we could have a price match error if it does not match correctly. So there's a couple different matching errors that you could have. This slide, basically, we're talking about timely processing of invoices. So any aged invoices that is 90 days and older should be submitted to the auditor's office with proper explanation. That explanation may require a signed memo by your department or division head, or a letter from the vendor that's verifying that that invoice is actually past due. So it's really anything above 90 days. If you have a question, you can log a tech desk ticket, reach out to the auditor's office, and we can help you understand what documentation might be necessary to make sure that that old invoice will get through workflow without rejection. Invoice status. So real quick, so a pending invoice is going to be an invoice that's drafted but not posted. So an open invoice is an approved invoice that has been posted but hasn't been paid yet. Okay, so once that check is cut, your invoice is no longer open. All right, so once we write a warrant and that warrant is printed and it's going to get mailed to a vendor, it's no longer open. A pending invoice is one that has not posted. It may have reached approval, but it's not posted yet. But it could also be any of the number ones below it. It could be in draft, it could be in review, it could be rejected, or it could be approved waiting to post. So those are your statuses. There's invoice status, and then there's the pending invoice workflow status. So the third and final view that we have pushed to users, however, this is not going to be your standard view because we have some other views out there for different groups within the city. We did not want to kind of supersede those. So this is not your standard view. it is one of your options now. So you can come into your options and you can select COC standard view. Once you've selected, if you want to pin it as your default, you come down and you hit these 3 horizontal dots and you pin as your default. So if you want this COC standard view, you just select the down arrow, pin as default. Why do you want this? Because we've added the vendor invoice review status for you. So if you come in here and you would filter on your name, and then you will see, you would always see what pending invoices you have, but you wouldn't see if they're in draft, if they're in review, if they've been rejected. So now we have that for you here. Previously, the way that you would tell if an invoice was in workflow is if it had this little circle with the arrow on it. If it has that, it means it's been submitted to workflow. If it doesn't have that, it's either in draft or it was rejected and you recalled it to a draft. So this used to tell you it's in workflow. Now you know exactly where it is within workflow. So again, not a standard view, but one that is available to you, and I think one that you'll find really helpful when you're monitoring where you're at, where your invoices are at, and maybe why they're not moving forward. So I guess one note with monitoring your invoices, it is up to the user who submitted it, right? The user who submitted the invoice should be monitoring their invoices daily to see if they've become, what status are they in? Have they gone from in review to rejected? Did they make it to approved? So it's important and it's on the user to make sure that you're monitoring your pending vendor invoices daily. 3-way match invoices, which I believe it's under 1,000, but don't hold me to that dollar amount. But 3-way match invoices are on what we call a happy path, right? So they basically are auto approved if they pass their price match and they pass the product receipt match. They will basically go to an auto approve, but those are reviewed by the auditors, and if they see anything that is incorrect with them prior to posting, they will place those back into a draft status. Generally, what we're going to ask for is up to 1 week that an invoice can be in workflow before you may check on it. So if you've submitted an invoice to workflow and it's there for 3 or 4 days and it's just stuck in review, that doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with it. But if it's sat for over a week, you might want to reach out to us and say, what's up with this specific invoice, and inquire about it, and then we'll be able to help assist you. Generally, if it's sat for longer than 7 days, it may have been missed or there's something wrong with it, but we need to follow up with it. And I know this is kind of it's kind of simple, but invoices aren't paid unless they're entered into the system. A lot of times, users may enter in an invoice and then it doesn't actually get submitted to workflow. So it's sitting out there, and the belief may be that it is been paid, and that's why it's important to monitor your invoices. And now with your invoice review status, you should better be able to do that with a little more clarity and information. So let's say something does get rejected. We get a lot of tickets that say, hey, this is rejected and I don't know why. So the best place, the place to look if something has been rejected is to go back into your workflow history. There will be a workflow drop down in the upper, in this top ribbon here. And then if it's been rejected, the only option you're going to have is to take a look at that workflow history. Instead of showing screenshots, let's just jump into one here. So I'm going to look, and I guess I'll back out, zoom out just a little bit. I look at these first 2 POs and I see that the match status failed. And I would think that, there's a couple product receipts here and it says failed. So we might need to look at that. It says failed and there's no product receipt here. So maybe they needed one there, but I'm going to jump down to the third one in case those may have gotten rejected because of the match status. The first piece of information, let me make this a little larger. The first piece of information that I'm going to glean from this before I even click workflow history is the last action that is taken. In this last action that was taken, you're generally going to see three. You're going to see your name, you're going to see the division for invoices, or if it's a two-way match, then you'll see your division or your department approvers. And then you're going to see, in this case, Dean Smith. Dean is an auditor. So we know that the last person to have an action on this, and it's rejected, was the auditor. So that's telling me that most likely Dean was the one that placed this in a rejected status. But I don't know for sure. So I come into workflow history. There's three panes in workflow history. There's what these are all the events that have happened in your workflow. So this is all that when you submit to workflow, all of these different actions are occurring, or these different items are occurring as it's checking on your invoice, and it's going through all these checks, and it's trying to validate that it's all right to continue on the path that it's on. Generally, not always, but generally, a rejected action is going to come towards the bottom, right? It wouldn't get rejected and then continue on in its work in its workflow path. So if you know it's rejected, you can come down here to the bottom, or to the scroll to the bottom of this first pane, and you can see rejection action. It was taken by Dean, and if I come over here, I can see that the remit address was mismatched. So we have an incorrect remit address. That's one way we can see it. We can also come down to tracking details. I like tracking details. I think that this is a good one. You can click up and go through, but it's going to come down to the last action that was taken. And what I'll do is I scroll through this, because all these work items are created for any user that is in this approval group. And then once one of them accepts it, you'll see that they have accepted your work item. They'll either approve it or it's been returned. So if you click on work item returned, you see the same comment from Dean, is that the remit address is mismatched. So that tells you what you need to know, that you need to recall this, and you need to update the remit address and then resubmit to workflow. So workflow history is where we're going to find. And so when I say recall as well, your recall button is here. In DAX 2012, I believe you could recall it from that workflow history dropdown. In Dynamics 365, we have to be in workflow history, and we're going to hit recall. When we hit recall, it says cancel workflow. You're not deleting your invoice. You're not canceling your invoice. You're stopping the workflow for the invoice so it can place it back into a draft status. It's important to note. So that's how we're going to get this invoice back to a draft status. We would update the remit address, and we would move forward. Again, this is really powerful when you search on your name and then you see draft, in review, approved, or rejected. So this is a good view. I would recommend making it your standard view, but just for some approver groups, we couldn't push it to all users in the city as their standard one. Common reasons that your invoice has not posted for payment. Far and away, probably the biggest one is that it was never submitted to workflow. Having that view that we just saw, that hopefully will help you better understand what is and is not in workflow. Obviously, invoices that get rejected, we need to make sure that we know why they're rejected, get them recalled and corrected, and then resubmitted back to workflow. So the match variance error, so price match variance or your product receipt match variance, just like your invoices can be auto approved, they can also auto reject. So that goes with your rejected invoices, but you still need to monitor those. Not all three-way invoices will get auto approved. And then again, as I've said in a couple slides previously, the invoice line is for more than the available balance on the purchase order. As I've noted, the invoice line, whether it is if it's a two-way, it is going to populate with the remaining available balance on the purchase order. If it's a three-way, it's going to populate with whatever product receipts are open. And as I've said, the end user should never overwrite the pre-populated quantity with a higher amount. You cannot spend more than what's available on the purchase order. So we have we have kind of gone over this as really as far as pending and open. Once the invoice has been paid, so a pending invoice, right? Once it posts, it doesn't mean it's been paid. It will go to open. So then you can check your open vendor invoices grid. And I apologize, I don't have one pulled up right now. And I didn't do the research in there to be able to demonstrate accurately, but you open vendor invoices, and that is where you're going to be able to check on it until the warrant has been posted and then printed and mailed out. Cheryl, I think I'm done, and I didn't make it quite to 90 minutes. So I'm tired of talking, and you're probably tired of hearing from me. I guess we have time for questions, or if there's comments from you or from I know Michelle was responding to questions. So.
Yeah, I think we can take some questions. I do want to circle back to, so if you have questions, go ahead and start entering those in the chat, and I'll read those off for Kyle. We did have a question early on that said, what if the vendor doesn't really provide an invoice number? And I'm just trying to get back to Michelle's comment here. So if your vendor does not provide an invoice number, generate a logical invoice number that will not duplicate for the same vendor. Don't use something so generic as, one or invoice one or just the date. Use something for the invoice number that would be a logically searchable item, and preferences, do not use special characters in those invoice numbers.
Yeah, Cheryl, I was going to say, as a user, I would always use the PO number, and I think that Michelle just said that. So if there is no invoice number, PO 1000 -1 or -A, B, C. But then, if you have any subsequent one, you go from 1 to 2 to 3, down the line. So, and thank you, Michelle, for confirming that.
So far, I don't see any additional questions coming in. So if you have anything, go ahead and add that. Just scrolling through the slide here to make sure we covered everything. Let's see. Let's see. Joey says, I've always used the date for those invoices, but I note it is much on the invoice. On the rare case of 2 invoices for the same vendor with the same date, label them A and B. That's a good idea as well. All right. And so I'm not seeing any other questions come on. We do have some members of the auditor's office here with us today. I know Michelle Hostetler is here. Michelle, do you have anything else that you want to mention with in particular this invoice group here? I can unmute you. Any updates on the Chase stuff? Or Kyle did allude to a payment ID earlier that had to do with holding holding checks for pickup or warrants for pickup. And I know that may be slightly different today with us moving to Chase. So is there any comments that you would like to share with the group?
Sure, I can give an update on that. Can you hear me? Make sure I've unmuted everywhere I needed to unmute. Yep. So we have began with the first live Chase check run was yesterday with some tax refunds, and then we sent another batch today. So we will be able to print more frequently than we have been. With regards to holds, for now, everything, we can still print warrants in-house. And so if you're putting a payment ID in the field to be held for special handling, we can still do that. However, we do plan to eliminate the ability to print warrants in here in City Hall. And so we are really trying to get everyone, thinking about how can we not have to do the special handling. There are certain cases where we know we are not going to be able to get around it, specifically, off the top of my head, real estate transactions or damage claims that require a signature and things like that, where we actually exchange the warrant in person with someone. But we need to get away because of best practices, internal controls, fraud prevention, things like that, away from the practice of holding checks. In the future, once we do eliminate the ability to print on site, we can have checks couriered to the auditor's office. but we really want to try to get rid of that unless it's absolutely necessary. So we're just asking people to start thinking outside of the box, and outside of that, well, this is the way it's always been done, you know, we can all kind of get into. We receive, as the auditor's office, we get tons of payments where we get no information from the state, from the county, from these other entities. So they can send payments to us without requiring remit information. So how can we send payments to them? And so I put in that email that, you know, there are some options where you could find contact and see if you can email, because that's what we often get. We'll get wires or checks, but we will get an email from the state or the county that says, a payment's coming your way, this is what it's for. And so we know to anticipate it. So we just are encouraging everyone to reach out to your vendors that you need to, you know, do special handling on the warrants with, and see what other options there are. Additionally, really quickly, because I know we're almost done, the P-card pilot has gone fairly well. It's been very successful with the few divisions that we have rolled it out to. Unfortunately, it's not been widely used. And so it was very successful in the fact that it's working very well, but it's been used very, very minimally. So we'll begin rolling out offering P-cards to other divisions here probably in August or September, once we have the outsourced warrant project kind of up and running kind of seamlessly. The P-cards will be rolled out maybe, you know, one per division or one per department to start with, and making sure that everything is working. But that's another option, just so you have that in the back of your head, that going forward, a lot of times with things like registration or applications, sometimes with our payments to other governments, these are things that maybe in the future you could put on your P-card, which serves, you know, it acts like a credit card, but it's a purchasing card instead of a credit card, because it has controls on it as with regards to how it can be used and what it can be used for. So just kind of be aware of that that's going to be coming down the line as well. But yeah, please try to work on, you know, really reducing, be very mindful and thoughtful about what it is you're putting payment IDs on for hold for special handling.
Michelle, I have a quick question that
Sure.
just came in. It says, regarding tool allowance reimbursements, do we know when they will start sending directly?
Now that we have the employee addresses in the files and we're starting to print from Chase, we'd like to start that immediately. I know that whenever we've done some imports for health and COAAA, where there's hundreds of mileage, this first batch we're actually sending to the departments to distribute as they used to, so that we can just make absolute certain that those addresses are on file and correctly, and that the next one will be mailed to where it should go, and if there wasn't any issues with the addresses in the D365 vendor portal or vendor files. So as far as tool allowances, if you guys want us to start mailing them immediately, we can. If you're like, hey, you know, can you send us this batch, we can do that as well. So just reach out to Brandy or Charlene and let them know your preference for the month of July. But in August, we're hoping to be mailing all employee warrants to their home addresses.
Let's see, and then I see another question. Let's see, will canceling the workflow to place a rejected invoice back in draft status for editing also reset the invoice's workflow history? So I think that question is asking if it has to go all the way back through workflow.
Well,
If
Cheryl, I think what Zach is asking here is, and I think is, so when you cancel your workflow, right, it will take, and if you're still looking in that invoice, you don't have a history of that workflow anymore. So that is, Zach, I think if that's what you're asking, that is, once that's rejected, you know, that invoice's workflow is over. So one document can have multiple workflows if it gets rejected, and then it has to come back to draft or it gets recalled. So if you want to find the workflow history, and Cheryl, I may not be showing them the best place to look for their workflow history. I guess Zach will follow up with that since we're running out of time, but you can come into workflow history. You would search by purchase order number that invoice is referencing, and then you can look for it and find the history that way. But I'll talk with Cheryl and we'll come up with a cohesive response, so we know, or a comprehensive response rather. So.
Okay. And then I see one additional question, is ACH an option for vendors who commonly request holds? So ACH is an option. However, I would probably direct you to talk with the treasurer about that. I know there are some changes going on there, but I don't want to speak on behalf of them. So if that's something of interest, I would at least reach out to the treasurer for, oh yeah, Michelle is responding. Yeah, for now, the treasurer still does ACH manually. So we do not want to move towards more ACH payments, but that will not likely happen until next year at best. If the payments are large and infrequent, check with the treasurer on that as an option. So yeah, definitely I would check with the treasurer. And then let's see, petty cash reimbursements, are they being held still, or how are they being handled?
Okay, for now, petty cash reimbursements are going to be held. We actually are in the final stages of prepping a petty cash policy. People have been asking for that for a while. We get a lot of questions. It's still very broad, but it is more detailed than that little bitty section we have in the purchasing code. Going forward, the plan is we will be, when we distribute the new policy, we're going to be asking every department head to submit a petty cash responsibility form, which outlines who their petty cash payee is, who's authorized to pick up cash from the treasurer's office. And we are going to add the department's mailing address to your remit payee. So for instance, Reckham Park, Patty Spalding is the payee. We're going to add Reckham Park's mailing address where Patty is located to that remit address, so that when we go full outsourced warrant printing, the warrants will print and they will be mailed to the department to Patty.
Perfect.
You know, I actually just realized we were scheduled till noon. So Kyle, you did great. One final thing that I wanted to touch on, just to make sure that this group in particular of invoicers is aware. So, you know, we have a vendor portal in D365. It's called Vendor Collaboration. And I know that a lot of the times in 2012, we had a lot of questions. You were receiving a lot of questions, I should say, from vendors asking if, you know, their warrant had been issued, you know, what was the status of their invoice, you know, those lines of questions. And so I did want to make you all aware that with D365 and the enhancements that we've done, you know, a vendor actually does have the ability to log in and see where their invoice is. Once it's been entered into the system, you know, Kyle talked about those statuses of draft and in review and approved. The vendor can actually see those items as well online. So if you have vendors, Lily, hello everyone, sorry about that. If you have vendors who are inquiring about payments, you know, it might be good to let them know that they can go to the portal and they actually have the ability to look that information up for themselves. You know, again, like I said, once the invoice is submitted, they'll see that it's in draft, they'll see that it's in review, but not yet approved. They'll see that it's approved, but not yet paid. And then ultimately they can also see that payment information also. So that is something that was not available to them in 2012. And definitely something that, you know, will be most helpful to vendors now so that they can go in and view that information themselves.
Yep, and Cheryl, I have that up on my screen now.
And Kyle's kind of showing the screens here. I know you're probably using a test vendor, so there's not anything showing, but this is the view that the vendor would see along with those statuses that I just mentioned. And then this is the invoicing tab. There's also another tab they can go into and they can actually see the payment information. So they'll see the warrant number, they'll see the day that it was issued, you know, and then I'm not sure if clear date is on here or not, Kyle. If you scroll to the right,
It is.
Clear date is here. So they'll be able to see the clear date as well as the amount. So all of this information is available to the vendors also. I just wanted to mention that because it may not be something that this group was aware of, but it definitely was something that we heard in 2012 and wanted to enhance, you know, moving forward.
And Cheryl, if I could just say one last
All
thing
right,
here.
and if there are no additional questions, I want to thank everybody for being here today. The focus, for the remainder of the year and after is training. So if there are items in particular you would like us to train on, please reach out, let me know. We're happy to put something together. I think this is a great way to bring everybody together and share information and things that we're learning along the way as well. I do believe that our next planned session is on RFQs, so that may or may not impact this particular group, but that training will be coming. And like I said, if you have additional ideas, just let us know. And thanks very much, Kyle. I know that a 90-minute presentation is a lot, so we appreciate it. And everybody have a great day.
Yep. Thank you all very much for your time and listening. And if you have any tips or tricks that you know that can make us all more efficient and better users, please send them to me so we can learn them and we can get them out to users as well. As you saw here, I am far from perfect, and we're always looking to learn. So if there are things that you guys have picked up as heavy users of the system, please send them our way so we can get them to everyone else.
Kyle, any final words?
I think I got muted somehow, Cheryl.
Nope, we heard you.